They dragged him away in handcuffs while she was still unconscious, the woman whose life he just saved. Ethan's hands were still slick with sweat when the security guards yanked his arms behind his back, metal cuffs biting into his wrists with a cold click that echoed through the marble lobby. The floor of Ashford Industries headquarters felt like ice against his knees as they forced him down, his work pants soaking up something wet. Water, coffee, he didn't know. 20 feet away, Cassandra Ashford's body lay motionless, paramedics swarming around her like wasps, their hands moving with practiced efficiency over the woman he'd just pulled back from death. The chaos erupted in waves, executives shouting into phones, others recording with trembling hands, their faces twisted with shock and something else. Something uglier. Then came the voice that would haunt his nightmares. Preston Blackwell, head of security, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. I saw him assaulting her. He was on top of her, kissing her. The fluorescent lights blazed too bright overhead, turning everything stark and merciless. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, so hard he thought they might crack. His phone buzzed somewhere in his confiscated work bag. Luna's school pickup reminder flashing on a screen he couldn't reach, a mundane detail from a life that was already slipping away from him. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Tokyo, midnight in London, afternoon in Sao Paulo, or evening in Lagos, I want to know. Don't just sit back and listen. Tell me where in the world you are right now. I want to see you. I want to know you're there. Now, let's dive into what happened to Ethan Vaughn. Just 10 seconds earlier, everything had been different. Cassandra Ashford had been walking toward the elevator bank, her heels clicking against marble with the confidence of someone who owned the building, because she did. Then her eyes rolled back, pupils disappearing into white, and her body crumpled like a marionette with cut strings. Ethan had been loading his toolbox, 30 feet away, his mind already on the drive to Luna's school, when he heard the sound, that terrible, hollow thud of a human body hitting unforgiving stone. His toolbox hit the floor before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He was running, his steel-toed boots pounding marble, his EMT training from college roaring back to life after years of dormancy. He dropped to his knees beside her, fingers finding her neck, pressing against the carotid artery. No pulse. Her chest wasn't moving. Her lips were already turning blue at the edges. The world narrowed to a single focus, everything else fading to white noise. Check airway. Tilt head back. Clear the passage. His hands positioned over her sternum, one palm over the other, his full weight behind each compression. 30 compressions. Hard enough to feel her ribs flex beneath his hands. Then 2 breaths, his mouth covering hers, creating a seal, watching her chest rise with air he was forcing into her lungs. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. His world became rhythm, became the desperate mathematics of keeping someone alive. Somewhere in the background, someone was screaming for help. Security boots were pounding toward him across the marble. But now, in the present, with handcuffs cutting circulation from his wrists and his knees aching against the cold floor, that heroic moment had been rewritten into something obscene. Preston Blackwell stood over him, his face a mask of cold certainty, playing his role for the growing crowd with the skill of a seasoned actor. Other witnesses were nodding, their faces closing off, bodies shifting away from Ethan like he carried a contagion. A woman in a Prada suit clutched her pearls, actually clutched them, her mouth forming a perfect O of horror. "I can't believe this," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. In broad daylight, right here. Ethan tried to explain, words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate rush, tripping over each other in their urgency. "She wasn't breathing. I was doing CPR. You have to believe me. I was trying to save her." But Preston's voice rolled over his like a bulldozer, smooth and authoritative and absolutely certain. "We have protocols here, Mr. Vaughn. You don't touch Miss Ashford. You especially don't put your mouth on her." The way he said it, the slight curl of disgust in his lip, made everything Ethan had done sound perverse. Made life-saving sound like assault. Made heroism sound like opportunity taken by a predator. Then Ethan remembered the cameras. Relief flooded through him, so powerful it made him dizzy. The security cameras. They would show everything. They would prove what had happened. "Check the cameras." His voice cracked with desperation and hope. "They'll show what happened. Check the footage." But Preston's smile didn't waver. If anything, it deepened, and there was something in his eyes that made Ethan's stomach turn to ice. "The cameras in this corridor have been down for maintenance since this morning," Preston said, his voice carrying easily to the crowd, to the phones recording everything. "Convenient timing for you to try something, wasn't it?" The lie came out so smooth, so practiced, like he'd been preparing it for hours. Ethan's stomach dropped into free fall. The paramedic working on Cassandra glanced up, gave a quick nod. Pulse stable, breathing restored. She was alive. But no one thanked Ethan. No one even looked at him with anything but disgust. They stared at him like he was something diseased, something dangerous that had infiltrated their pristine marble and glass sanctuary. His work ID badge hung from his neck on its cheap lanyard, Von HVAC Services in faded letters. Suddenly it felt like an indictment. Working class. Maintenance. Invisible until he dared to touch someone important. Until he'd crossed a line he hadn't known existed. The police arrived with sirens and flashing lights that painted the lobby in alternating blue and red. A detective read him his Miranda rights, the words running together into meaningless sound. Preston leaned close, so close Ethan could smell coffee on his breath, could see the pores in his skin. His whisper was for Ethan alone, hot and venomous against his ear. "You should have stayed in your lane. People like you don't touch people like her." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and more executives flooded out, their faces shocked and hungry, phones already recording, capturing his humiliation for posterity. Ethan's mind spiraled. Luna and Noah. Pickup time was in 40 minutes. The $1,847 in his checking account that wouldn't even begin to cover bail. The terrible, crushing realization that he had done everything right, everything exactly right, and it didn't matter at all. A detective in a wrinkled suit knelt beside Cassandra's body, asking Preston what he'd witnessed. Preston's version of events was solidifying into official record with every word he spoke. Strong hands hauled Ethan to his feet, guided him toward the exit. His toolbox lay abandoned on the floor, tools scattered like evidence at a crime scene. His phone buzzed again in the confiscated bag. Probably the school calling now, wondering where he was. One executive whispered to another, not quite quiet enough, "Did you hear?" He was alone with her for at least 30 seconds before anyone arrived. The implication hung in the air like poison gas, spreading through the crowd, infecting every mind it touched. 3 hours earlier, Ethan Vaughn had been an ordinary man with ordinary problems, a single dad trying to keep his head above water, counting pennies, making lunches, helping with homework. Now he was about to lose everything. If you're already feeling the injustice of what just happened to Ethan, then you need to subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller right now, because this story gets so much darker before it gets better. If you don't subscribe, you'll miss tomorrow's story about a teacher who saved a student and got destroyed for it. Don't be that person who watches the whole thing but can't hit one button. And if you're really not going to subscribe, at least tell me in the comments why you won't. What's stopping you? 6:15 in the morning. The alarm clock screamed its mechanical song, and Ethan's hand shot out from under the covers to silence it before it woke the kids. Except Luna was already awake, sitting at their tiny kitchen table in her pajamas with the dancing unicorns, hunched over homework she'd forgotten to finish the night before. Her pencil scratched against paper in the quiet apartment, her face scrunched up in concentration. Noah was still asleep in the room they shared, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, the green one with the missing eye that he'd named Kevin and refused to sleep without. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms in a building that had seen better decades. The linoleum in the kitchen was peeling at the corners, curling up like old photographs. The radiator clanked and hissed, providing just enough heat to keep the November chill at bay, but never quite enough to make the place comfortable. Ethan moved through the morning routine on autopilot, his body knowing the steps, even while his brain was still climbing toward consciousness. Scrambled eggs in the pan, bread in the toaster, orange juice from concentrate poured into mismatched glasses. On the counter, the bills stacked like accusations. Electric bill stamped with red letters, final notice. Luna's field trip permission slip, requiring $45 he didn't have. Noah's ear infection, follow-up appointment reminder with a $150 copay circled in red. His ex-wife Karen's child support was 3 months late again, and her lawyer's responses to his inquiries had gone from apologetic to annoyed to silent. Every morning started with the same mental math, the same shuffling of pennies, the same impossible calculations of what could wait and what couldn't, what would bounce and what might clear if he timed it just right. The rituals of single parenthood had become second nature. Ethan packed lunches with the efficiency of a factory worker, peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off the way Luna liked them, apple slices stored in sandwich bags with a squeeze of lemon juice to keep them from browning, cookies from the dollar store that came in packages of 30 for $3. He checked Luna's homework, leaning over her shoulder to help with long division, his finger tracing the numbers as he explained, carrying, and remainders in the patient voice he perfected over 7 years of fatherhood. Then he padded quietly to the boys' room to wake Noah, tickling his feet until the 5-year-old giggled and squirmed, his eyes opening to reveal that perfect, uncomplicated joy that only small children possess. Ethan pulled on his work uniform, the faded blue polo with Von HVAC Services embroidered on the chest, jeans worn soft at the knees, steel-toed boots that had seen better years. Luna asked the question over breakfast, her voice small and careful, like she already knew the answer would hurt. "Dad, how come we can't afford the zoo field trip?" Ethan's heart cracked just a little, the way it did every time he had to explain poverty to his children without using that word. He smiled, reaching across the table to ruffle her hair. "We'll go to the zoo on my next day off, just the 3 of us. It'll be even better than the field trip." He was lying, and they both knew it. They couldn't afford the zoo either, not with gas and admission and the inevitable request for souvenirs. But he needed to see her smile, needed that moment of hope in her eyes, even if it was built on a foundation of promises he probably couldn't keep. Noah spilled his juice then, orange liquid spreading across the table in a sticky flood, and the small crisis required immediate attention. Paper towels, reassurances that accidents happen, a quick change of Noah's shirt. When Ethan checked the time, it was 7:03. They were late. The drop-off at Lincoln Elementary was rushed and chaotic, Luna's backpack forgotten in the car, a sprint back to retrieve it, her teacher Ms. Gomez catching Ethan at the classroom door. She was kind about it, her voice gentle, but the field trip money came up again. It was due by Friday, and today was Wednesday. Ethan felt the familiar heat of embarrassment crawling up his neck as he promised to send the money, knowing he was buying time he didn't have. Luna hugged him tight before she ran off, her small arms squeezing around his waist. "Love you, Dad," she called over her shoulder, her backpack bouncing against her spine as she joined her friends near the cubbies. Those 3 words carried him through most days. Noah's daycare drop-off at the church basement program came next, and with it the familiar guilt that gnawed at Ethan's insides. The program was affordable, which meant crowded, which meant overworked staff watching too many kids in too small a space. But it was what he could manage, and the women who ran it were kind even if they were stretched too thin. Noah's small face appeared in the window as Ethan walked back to his truck, his palm pressed against the glass in a tiny goodbye that made Ethan's chest ache. He dropped out of college when Luna was born, abandoned the pre-med track that had consumed his late teens and early 20s. He'd been EMT certified, passionate about emergency medicine, already accepted into programs that would have led to medical school. But babies need diapers and formula and doctor visits, and somewhere safe to sleep, and student loans don't pay for any of that. The dreams had been carefully folded away, tucked into a drawer in his mind labeled someday that he rarely opened anymore. His marriage to Karen had crumbled under the weight of financial stress, the constant pressure of never having enough crushing whatever love had existed between them. She'd left 2 years ago, chosen her career and her freedom over custody battles and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. Ethan carried the ache of being both parents simultaneously, of being the one who had to be everything, knowing he fell short in 1,000 small ways every single day. The work truck pulled up to Ashford Industries just before 8:30, and Ethan sat for a moment staring up at the glass tower that seemed to scrape the belly of the morning clouds. The building glittered in the autumn sunlight, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, the kind of architecture that announced wealth and power to anyone within viewing distance. Preston Blackwell checked his ID at the security desk in the lobby, barely glancing at Ethan's face, his eyes already moving to the next person in line. The invisible working class, The people who kept buildings running and toilets flushing and air circulating, present but unseen unless something broke. Ethan's assignment was simple: maintenance on the executive floor HVAC system, estimated 3 hours, straightforward work. He took the service elevator, the one tucked behind the main banks, the one that smelled like cleaning solution and carried workers who weren't meant to be seen. His toolbox felt heavy in his hand as he emerged onto the executive floor. The contrast between his world and theirs hit him immediately, the way it always did. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, original artwork on the walls that probably cost more than he made in a year, the smell of expensive coffee drifting from the executive lounge where a machine that looked like it belonged in a spaceship produced drinks that probably cost $12 each. In the lobby downstairs, he'd noticed Cassandra Ashford's portrait hanging in a place of honor, her expression confident and slightly amused, like she knew a secret the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. The plaque beneath read, "Youngest female CEO in tech industry history. Harvard MBA. Built a $7 billion empire." The distance between their lives couldn't be measured in miles, or even money. It was measured in galaxies, in entirely different universes of experience and possibility. Ethan climbed into the ceiling to access the HVAC system, sweat already beginning to drip down his spine from the heat trapped in the cramped space above the drop tiles. The fluorescent lights were harsh up here, unfiltered by the frosted panels below, turning everything stark and industrial. Through the gaps in the ceiling tiles, he could see the executives moving below him like members of a different species. Their problems, stock options and merger negotiations and yacht club memberships, were incomprehensible to someone who did mental math about whether he could afford both the electricity bill and groceries in the same week. But something caught his attention as he worked, checking refrigerant levels and tightening connections. Cassandra Ashford walked through the corridor below, and even from his elevated position, Ethan could see she looked pale. She touched her chest briefly, a gesture so quick most people probably missed it, her hand pressing against her sternum like she was trying to calm something inside. Preston Blackwell hovered nearby, always watching her, his attention focused on her in a way that seemed both professional and something else. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, and his stomach immediately dropped. Luna's school number on the screen. That particular brand of parental panic flooded his system as he answered quietly, his voice echoing weird in the confined space. False alarm. She'd forgotten her lunch, and the school wanted to know if he could bring it or if they should give her something from the cafeteria. Relief washed over him in a wave, so powerful it left him momentarily dizzy. He told them he'd drop it off during his lunch break, then return to his work, his hands moving through familiar motions. He didn't notice Preston watching him through the office glass below, something calculating shifting behind the security chief's eyes. Ethan finished the repair, descended from the ceiling, packed up his tools with the satisfaction of a job completed properly. Preston approached as Ethan was loading his toolbox, his voice professionally neutral. "You're done." Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "All set. Systems running perfectly now." He had no way of knowing these would be his last moments of anonymity, his last moments of being invisible in the way working people are always invisible to those above them. 20 minutes later, Cassandra Ashford would collapse, and Ethan's life would detonate. You're watching a good man's life fall apart, and if that doesn't make you want to subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller, I don't know what will. We tell stories about ordinary people facing impossible situations every single day. If you're not subscribed yet, you're going to forget to come back tomorrow, and you'll miss the moment when everything Ethan built comes crashing down. Don't let that happen. And if you're still not subscribing, drop a comment explaining what kind of content would make you subscribe, because I genuinely want to know. Ethan was loading his tools into the truck in the parking garage when his phone buzzed again, the vibration insistent against his hip. His mom's name lit up the screen, and he answered while hefting his toolbox into the truck bed, the metal clanging against the liner. She was calling to remind him about Noah's dentist appointment next week, her voice warm and concerned in that way only mothers manage, asking if he needed her to take Noah since it was during work hours. Ethan was already doing the mental math, adding the appointment to the overcrowded calendar in his mind, calculating the cost of missing half a day of work against the $100 copay against the inevitable additional charges if Noah needed more than just a cleaning. He thanked her, promised he'd figure it out, ended the call with the familiar weight of one more thing pressing down on his shoulders. He slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine coughing to life with a rattle that had been getting worse for weeks. The check engine light glowed orange on the dashboard, mocking him with problems he couldn't afford to fix. He was about to pull out of his parking spot, already thinking about the route to Luna's school to drop off her forgotten lunch, when his radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice cut through the static, urgent and clipped. Building emergency. All contractors report to security immediately. Medical emergency on executive floor. Repeat, all contractors report to security. Something ancient and trained kicked in Ethan's chest, muscle memory from his EMT days flooding his system with focus. He killed the engine, grabbed his first aid kit from behind the seat, a habit he'd never broken even years after his certification lapsed, and ran back toward the building. The adrenaline sharpened everything, made the autumn air taste electric, made his vision tunnel and crystallize on the single purpose of getting there, getting to whoever needed help. He took the service stairs 2 at a time, his boots pounding against concrete, his breath coming hard but controlled, his body remembering the training that had once been his entire world. When he burst through the door onto the executive floor, chaos greeted him like a physical force. Executives were clustered near the elevator bank, their expensive suits and designer dresses forming a useless wall of panic and confusion. Someone was screaming for help, the sound high and desperate and raw. Ethan pushed through the crowd, and people parted for him, their faces relieved that someone who looked like they knew what they were doing had arrived. Then he saw her. Cassandra Ashford was on the floor, her body absolutely still in that terrible way that bodies are still when something is very wrong. Unconscious, not breathing. Her assistant stood frozen nearby, hands covering her mouth, making small, wounded sounds but unable to move, unable to help. Ethan's training overrode every social barrier, every class divide, every instinct to hesitate before touching someone so far above his station. He didn't see a billionaire CEO. He didn't see Harvard degrees, or $7 billion empires, or portraits in lobbies. He saw a patient. He saw someone dying. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already moving through the assessment he'd practiced 1,000 times in training and dozens of times in real emergencies back when he'd worn the uniform and driven the ambulance. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice was steady, loud enough to cut through without shouting. No response. He placed 2 fingers against her carotid artery, pressing firm but gentle, searching for the rhythmic pulse that should be there. Nothing. He tilted her head back, checked her airway. Clear, no obstruction. He leaned close, his cheek near her mouth, watching her chest. No breath. No rise and fall. No air moving. The calm that descends during crisis settled over him like a familiar coat, the panic of everyone around him fading to white noise as his world narrowed to this single purpose. Someone call 911. Now. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that makes people obey without thinking. Then he started chest compressions. The physical reality of CPR is harder than most people realize, harder than the movies make it look. Ethan positioned his hands over her sternum, one palm flat, the other laced on top, his shoulders directly over his hands. He put his full weight behind each compression, feeling her ribs flex beneath his palms, not breaking, but flexing in that way that means you're doing it right, doing it hard enough to actually move blood through a stopped heart. He counted out loud, his voice rhythmic and measured. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 30 compressions at the right depth, the right speed, his arms already beginning to burn from the exertion. Then he tilted her head back, pinched her nose closed, and gave 2 rescue breaths, his mouth covering hers to create a seal, watching her chest rise as air filled her lungs. Good seal. Good volume. Back to compressions. Sweat was running down his spine, soaking through his work shirt. The crowd around him was growing, more executives arriving, more phones appearing, the modern reflex to document everything. Preston Blackwell arrived then, pushing through the crowd, and Ethan registered his presence somewhere in his peripheral awareness, but stayed focused on the count, on the rhythm, on keeping this woman alive. Another cycle. Compressions, breath, compressions, breath. Someone in the crowd was timing him. He heard a voice call out, 90 seconds, and he felt a faint flutter beneath his fingers when he checked her pulse again. Her color was improving slightly, the blue tinge fading from her lips. Relief flooded through him, pure and powerful. She was coming back. He could feel it. Just a little longer. Just keep going. That's when Preston shouted, his voice cutting through everything like a gunshot. Get him off her. Ethan's brain struggled to process the words, still locked in the singular focus of keeping his patient alive, the world beyond compressions and breaths, and pulse checks not quite real yet. Preston grabbed his shoulder, yanking him back with surprising force. Ethan resisted instinctively, his body not willing to abandon the patient mid-cycle. She's not stable yet, I need to. But Preston's voice boomed over his protest, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to be recorded by a dozen phones. He was assaulting her. I saw it. Ethan's brain short-circuited, the words making no sense, failing to connect to any reality he understood. What? No, I was doing CPR, but the crowd's energy was shifting. He could feel it like a temperature drop, like the air pressure changing before a storm. Whispers started, spreading like infection. Someone gasped, the sound sharp and accusing. Preston positioned himself as protector, as hero, his body language broadcasting authority and righteousness. Ethan tried to explain, words tumbling out in a desperate rush, tripping over each other. She wasn't breathing. She had no pulse. I was trained for this. I was saving her. Other executives were stepping back from him now, creating distance, their faces transforming from grateful to horrified to disgusted. One woman covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Preston's performance was utterly convincing, his voice dripping with disgust so authentic it could have been real. Putting your hands all over her, your mouth on her, is this why you took this job? Ethan's world tilted, the floor seeming to shift beneath him like the deck of a ship in rough seas. Understanding was dawning, cold and terrible, settling in his gut like swallowed ice. They didn't see a rescuer. They didn't see someone who had just pulled a dying woman back from the edge. They saw an opportunist. They saw a predator. Class warfare was crystallizing in real time, the invisible barrier between his world and theirs suddenly visible and insurmountable. He was still trying, his voice desperate now, the calm of crisis management evaporating into panic. I'm EMT certified. I was saving her life. This is textbook CPR, but Preston cut him off with surgical precision. Where's your certification? Can you prove it? Ethan's wallet was in his truck. His old EMT card was in that wallet, expired 2 years ago because he couldn't afford the renewal fees, the continuing education courses, the bureaucracy that required money he needed for rent and food and his kids' basic needs. The trap was closing around him with the inevitability of nightfall. Security was arriving with handcuffs already drawn, their faces set with that professional neutrality that meant they'd already decided who was guilty. The paramedics finally arrived, real paramedics with equipment and authority, and they took over Cassandra's care. One of them checked her vitals and nodded, a small gesture of approval at the CPR quality, ribs slightly bruised from proper compression depth, pulse restored, breathing returning, but he didn't speak up for Ethan. Didn't tell the security guards or the crowd or anyone that what Ethan had done was perfect, was exactly right, had saved this woman's life. Everyone was protecting themselves, covering their own liability, staying out of whatever the situation was becoming. Cassandra was unconscious, unable to defend him or confirm his story. The video cameras were conveniently down for maintenance. It was only Preston's word against his, and Preston's word carried the weight of authority, of class, of insider status, of being one of them in a way Ethan would never be. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, cold metal biting into skin, and Ethan knew with sick certainty that truth didn't matter here. Facts didn't matter. What mattered was who people believed, and they would always believe the man in the suit over the man in the work boots. Ethan had spent 34 years learning that the world was unfair, but he'd never learned it quite like this. I need you to pause right here and really think about whether you're subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. This story is only going to get more intense, and if you're not subscribed, you'll lose track of this channel and forget to come back. We post stories like this that expose real injustice every single day. If you care about what happens to Ethan and his kids, subscribe now. And for those who won't subscribe, seriously, why not? Drop a comment and tell me honestly what's holding you back, because I want to understand. The interrogation room at the police station was exactly what you'd imagine if you'd ever watched a crime show. Cinder block walls painted institutional beige, fluorescent lights that hummed with a frequency just high enough to give you a headache, a metal table bolted to the floor, chairs that had seen too many confessions and too many lies. Ethan sat across from Detective Ramsey, a man in his 50s with weathered skin and skeptical eyes that had probably seen every variation of human behavior and stopped being surprised by any of it decades ago. Preston's statement was laid out on the table between them, typed up on official letterhead, looking damning in its neat formatting and bureaucratic language. Detective Ramsey read it aloud, his voice flat and professional, stripping even more humanity from the words. Suspect was observed performing sexual assault under guise of medical assistance. Witness saw suspect forcibly kissing victim, hands on victim's body. Victim unconscious and unable to consent. Each word landed like a nail being driven into a coffin. Ethan's protest came out strangled, desperate, his voice cracking with the kind of panic that probably made him look guilty even though he wasn't. That's not what happened. It was CPR. Check with the paramedics. She wasn't breathing. She had no pulse. I saved her life. Detective Ramsey looked at him with those tired, skeptical eyes, the eyes of someone who'd heard every excuse and every lie and couldn't tell the difference anymore. Paramedics say she was alive and stable when they arrived. They didn't witness the alleged CPR. The word alleged hit like acid, burning away the truth and leaving only doubt. The paramedics hadn't lied, not exactly. She was alive when they got there. She was stable. They hadn't seen Ethan performing CPR because they'd arrived after he'd already brought her back. But their statement, filtered through legal language and official reports, made it sound like maybe there had been no CPR at all. Maybe it had all been a convenient story. The nightmare deepened with every passing hour, each new procedure adding another layer of humiliation and helplessness. They took his mugshot. The camera flashed brutal and exposing, capturing him at his absolute worst. Exhausted, terrified, still in his work clothes that smelled like sweat and panic. Fingerprints next, his hands pressed onto the electronic scanner, each fingertip recorded and cataloged like he was already a criminal, already guilty, already part of the system. Then they swabbed his mouth for DNA, the technician's gloved hands impersonal and efficient, and Ethan's stomach twisted because he knew what they'd find. Of course his DNA would match. He'd given her rescue breaths. His mouth had been on hers. Every piece of evidence that should prove he'd saved her life would instead be used to prove he'd assaulted her. The bail hearing came next, and Ethan stood before a judge who looked at him with the same calculation you'd use to assess a potentially rabid dog. Bail was set at $50,000. Ethan didn't have $5,000 for the bondsman, didn't have $500, barely had $50 after the bill stacked on his kitchen counter. His public defender was assigned then, Marcus Reed, a man who seemed kind but was drowning in an ocean of cases, who could only spare 10 minutes to explain the magnitude of what Ethan was facing. The charges were read in clinical language that didn't capture the horror. Sexual assault, and assault on a person of significance, an enhanced charge that existed because his alleged victim was important, wealthy, powerful. The possible sentence was 5 to 15 years. Ethan's mind was breaking, fragmenting into sharp pieces that cut him from the inside. His kids, his job, his entire life. Marcus was honest in a way that felt both compassionate and cruel. Without video evidence, and with a credible witness saying he saw assault, this is a tough case. It's your word against a head of security for a billion-dollar company. The class divide was made explicit, spoken aloud in a way that usually stayed politely hidden. The truth was simple and terrible. His word would never be worth as much as Preston's. They put him in a holding cell while the bail situation was sorted out, and the other inmates were curious in that particular way men in cages get curious about fresh meat. "What did you do?" someone asked, a guy with tattoos crawling up his neck and eyes that had seen worse things than Ethan could imagine. Ethan explained, his voice hollow, too exhausted for shame. He'd saved a woman's life and been accused of assaulting her. There was a beat of silence, and then one guy started laughing, a sound devoid of humor, just bitter recognition of how the world worked. "You saved a rich lady's life? Man, you're fucked." The bleak humor landed with the weight of truth. Ethan was allowed one phone call, and he didn't call a lawyer. He called his mom, Her voice broke when she heard where he was, what had happened, and he could hear her trying to hold herself together for his sake, trying to be strong when her world was collapsing just like his. She said she'd take the kids tonight, would pick them up from school and daycare, would tell them something that wouldn't scare them. Then Luna got on the phone, her voice small and bright and completely innocent. "Daddy, where are you?" Ethan lied, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. "I have to work late, baby. Grandma's going to get you tonight. I'll see you tomorrow." She accepted it without question because she was used to him working late, used to the unpredictable schedule of someone who lived paycheck to paycheck. The guilt was worse than the fear, worse than the handcuffs or the charges or the possibility of 15 years in prison. Noah was too young to take the phone, but Ethan could hear him in the background asking if it was Daddy, his voice carrying that particular excitement kids get when they miss their parents. Ethan hung up, pressed his forehead against the concrete wall of the holding cell, and tried to figure out how to explain this to them when everything fell apart. How do you tell a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old that Daddy is going to prison because he saved someone's life? He was released on his own recognizance the next morning, the judge noting his lack of prior record, his stable employment, his family ties, all the things that made him look like a responsible member of society, even though he was being accused of something monstrous. But the release came with conditions. He was ordered to stay away from Ashford Industries and Cassandra Ashford. An ankle monitor was fitted, the technician explaining the rules with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, strapping the electronic shackle around Ethan's leg like it was routine. When he walked out into the morning sunlight, everything looked different, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis while he'd been inside. There was a news van in the parking lot. Someone had leaked the story. A reporter spotted him immediately and started shouting questions, her voice sharp and invasive. "Mr. Vaughn, did you assault Cassandra Ashford? Do you have anything to say to your victim?" A camera was suddenly in his face, lens huge and accusing, recording his panic and his shame for the evening news. Ethan ran to his truck, hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the lock. He drove home in a state of shock, his mind unable to fully process what was happening. His phone exploded with notifications, the buzzing constant and aggressive. Text from his boss at Vaughn HVAC. "Call me immediately." His mom sending updates. News is saying terrible things. "Call me when you can." Unknown numbers sending threats and slurs. Messages from people who'd never met him but had already decided he was guilty. One text made his blood run cold. "Child molester scum. We know where your kids go to school." His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. When he arrived at his apartment building, his door had been spray-painted, the word rapist, in red letters dripping down the wood like blood. The building manager was waiting for him, appeared from his office like he'd been watching for Ethan's return. "You can't stay here. Other tenants are complaining. I'm filing for eviction." The words were delivered without sympathy, just business, just liability management. His boss called while Ethan stood staring at the graffiti on his door, and the conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. He was being fired, effective immediately. "I can't have this kind of publicity associated with the business. I'm sure you understand." Ethan barely processed it, his brain overloaded with catastrophe, unable to fully register each new disaster as it piled onto the last. He packed a bag mechanically, moving through his apartment like a ghost, grabbing clothes and toiletries and a few of the kids' favorite toys. His mom's house was the only safe place left. As he loaded his truck, he noticed Mrs. Patel watching from her window across the courtyard, her face twisted with disgust. This was the same woman who used to stop him in the hallway to tell him he was such a good father, who'd praised him for how well he was raising Luna and Noah on his own. 24 hours had destroyed his reputation completely, turned him from good neighbor to monster in the time it took for a news cycle to complete. He drove to his mom's small house in the suburbs, the ankle monitor heavy around his leg, a constant reminder of his new status as accused criminal. Luna and Noah were playing in the front yard when he arrived, not understanding yet that everything had changed, that their world was about to shatter. Luna saw him and ran, her backpack bouncing against her spine, her face bright with uncomplicated joy. "Daddy!" Her trust was absolute, total, unwavering. She believed he was a hero, believed he could fix anything, believed he was good. Ethan caught her up in his arms and held her tight, knowing that trust would shatter soon, knowing that questions were coming he didn't know how to answer. A news helicopter appeared overhead, circling like a vulture, and Ethan hustled the kids inside while his mom watched with tears in her eyes. Somewhere across town, in a private hospital suite with flowers and security and the kind of care that money buys, Cassandra Ashford was waking up. She didn't know yet that saving her life had destroyed his. If you're still watching but haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, I have to ask, what are you waiting for? This man saved someone's life and lost everything. If that doesn't move you to hit subscribe, I don't know what will. We share stories about injustice and resilience every day. Don't be the person who watches the entire story but can't support the channel. And if you're genuinely not subscribing, tell me in the comments, is it because you don't want reminders? Because you don't like the content? I really want to know what would change your mind. Day 3 arrived, and the story had gone viral in the way that only modern disasters can go viral. Fast, merciless, and everywhere at once. The hashtag Ashford Assault was trending on every platform, spreading across the internet like a disease. Each share and retweet another nail in Ethan's coffin. The media narrative had been set in concrete, and it was simple, digestible, perfect for outrage. Working-class maintenance man attacks unconscious billionaire CEO. Class warfare disguised as concern for women's safety. The news segments all follow the same formula, showing Ethan's mugshot, exhausted, terrified, guilty-looking even though he wasn't, next to glamorous photos of Cassandra Ashford at galas, dripping in diamonds, powerful and untouchable. The visual contrast was deliberate, carefully constructed to tell a story without words. Predator and prey, monster and victim. The cable news legal analysts were having a field day, their perfectly styled hair and tailored suits filling screens in every airport and waiting room and gym across the country. This case highlights critical issues around workplace safety and the vulnerability of women in corporate spaces. They intoned with practiced gravity, as if they were discussing some abstract legal principle instead of a man's life being destroyed. Feminist groups were picketing outside the courthouse, holding signs demanding justice for Cassandra. Men's rights groups were defending Ethan online, which somehow made everything worse because now he was associated with people who used terms like false accusation epidemic and made the whole thing about their agenda instead of the truth. Ethan watched it all from his mom's couch, his body present but his mind somewhere else, numb and disconnected, like he was watching a story about someone else's life. Luna was at school, where kids were asking her if her daddy was bad, their children's cruelty unfiltered and direct. Teachers eyed him weird at pickup, standing a little farther away than they used to, their smiles tight and uncomfortable. Prosecutor Diane Kruger held a press conference on the courthouse steps, and even through a screen you could tell she was ambitious, could see the political aspirations burning behind her eyes like fever. She saw this case as rocket fuel for her career, a high-profile prosecution that would make her name, get her face on television, position her for whatever office she was planning to run for next. Her statement was calculated down to the last syllable, technically not prejudicing the case but absolutely poisoning public opinion. We must send a message that no woman, regardless of status, is vulnerable to assault, and no perpetrator, regardless of intent claimed, is above the law. The words were perfect, quotable, designed to be clipped for sound bites. Preston Blackwell stood at her side, playing the role of grieving protector with the skill of a trained actor. His face was appropriately somber, his voice heavy with concern when he spoke about Cassandra's condition. Ms. Ashford is recovering physically, but the emotional trauma of what she experienced. He trailed off meaningfully, letting the audience fill in the blanks with their worst imaginations. Cassandra herself still hadn't made a statement, was reportedly too traumatized to face the media, though Ethan wondered distantly if anyone had actually asked her what happened or if they'd just decided for her. Marcus Reed, his public defender, sent an email that afternoon. "We need to talk about a plea deal." Ethan's response was immediate, typed with shaking hands. "I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus's reply came back just as fast. "That might not matter." Then Karen dropped her bomb, and the betrayal was so complete, so staggering, that Ethan almost couldn't process it as real. His ex-wife, the woman who had abandoned her children 2 years ago, who had chosen her career and her freedom over custody battles and parent-teacher conferences, who hadn't paid child support in 3 months and barely called on birthdays, filed an emergency custody motion. Her lawyer's statement was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Given Mr. Vaughn's arrest for sexual assault and current criminal proceedings, we believe the children would be safer in their mother's full-time care. The woman who had walked away was suddenly positioning herself as the protective parent, using his nightmare as an opportunity to look responsible, to rewrite her own narrative of abandonment into one of maternal concern. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. Social services opened an investigation immediately, because of course they did, because when you're already drowning, the system just keeps piling more water on top of you. A worker came to his mom's house, a woman with kind eyes but a clipboard full of forms that could take his children away. She interviewed Luna and Noah separately, and Ethan had to watch through the window, helpless, as his 7-year-old daughter looked confused and scared, as his 5-year-old son cried without fully understanding why. The social worker's face stayed neutral, professional, but she was taking notes the entire time. Everything Ethan said could potentially be used against him. Everything he did was being evaluated, judged, recorded. His mom held his hand while they waited, her fingers fragile in his, and she kept saying, "We'll get through this." But her voice was uncertain, lacking the conviction that usually made her reassurances believable. The financial collapse was accelerating with the kind of momentum that can't be stopped once it starts. Unemployment benefits were denied because he'd been fired for cause, because even though the charges hadn't been proven, they were reason enough to make him unemployable. His savings were draining away at a terrifying rate: lawyer fees, ankle monitor fees, basic living expenses. His truck was repossessed because he was 3 months behind on payments, and the lender saw the news and decided he was a risk. He was using his mom's car for court appearances now, adding to the ways he was burdening the woman who had already given him so much. The bills kept piling up, each one a small catastrophe that fed into the larger disaster. Noah's ear infection was getting worse because Ethan couldn't afford the follow-up appointment, couldn't afford the stronger antibiotics the doctor had warned might be necessary. Luna needed glasses. Her prescription had expired, and she was squinting at the board at school, falling behind because she couldn't see properly. The everyday crises of poverty were compounding the legal nightmare, each feeding into the other, creating a spiral that had no bottom. Job applications went nowhere. His name was now Googleable, and the first result was always some variation of HVAC worker arrested for assault, or maintenance man accused of attacking CEO. The few interviews, he managed to get cut short the moment they recognized him, their faces changing from professional interest to barely disguised horror. One hiring manager was actually honest about it, which was almost worse than the ones who made excuses. "Even if you're innocent, we can't take the publicity risk." "I'm sorry." The scarlet letter was permanent, branded onto him before he'd even had a trial. Week 2 arrived, and Ethan's mental health was fracturing in ways he couldn't hide anymore. He wasn't sleeping, couldn't sleep, lay awake staring at the ceiling of his childhood bedroom in his mom's house while anxiety ate him alive from the inside. Panic attacks came without warning, his chest tightening until he couldn't breathe, his vision tunneling, his hands shaking so badly he had to hide them from the kids. He watched Luna and Noah play in his mom's backyard, their laughter floating through the window, and the knowledge that he might lose them was a physical pain in his chest, constant and crushing. Marcus called with the official plea offer, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Diane Kruger was offering a reduced charge, probation, and sex offender registration. "Take the deal, Ethan. You'll avoid prison. You might even keep some custody rights, supervised visits at least." But Ethan couldn't do it, couldn't make himself say words that weren't true, just to make the nightmare stop. "I saved her life. I won't say I assaulted her. I won't put my name on a lie." Marcus sighed, the sound of a man who'd seen this play out too many times. "Then we go to trial. And I have to be honest with you, we're going to lose. The jury will see a rich victim, and a poor defendant, and a credible witness. Your CPR story sounds convenient. Juries don't like convenient. They like simple narratives, and the prosecution's narrative is very simple." That night, Ethan found himself Googling wrongful conviction statistics on his mom's laptop, falling down a rabbit hole of cases about innocent people who went to prison, about how many of them were still there, about how the system crushed people like him every single day. The numbers were terrifying, confirming everything Marcus had implied. He drank some of his mom's whiskey, the first alcohol he'd touched in years, the burn doing nothing to numb the fear. He stood in front of her refrigerator, staring at Luna's drawings held up by magnets. Stick figures of their family, hearts and flowers and sunshine, the innocent art of a child who still believed her father was a hero. Across town, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, in a space that cost more per month than Ethan had made in a year, Cassandra Ashford was asking her assistant a question that would change everything. What happened the day I collapsed? Listen, if you've watched 5 chapters of Ethan's Nightmare and still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, you're basically saying you're okay with forgetting this story exists. We post content like this, raw, emotional, real, every single day. Stories about people fighting impossible odds. Hit subscribe so you don't lose us in the algorithm. And if you're one of those people who just won't subscribe no matter what, drop a comment and tell me honestly, what would it take? What am I missing? Because I genuinely want to make content you'd actually support. Cassandra Ashford's perspective had been absent from this story until now, and there's a reason for that. She'd woken up 3 days ago in a private hospital room with no memory of what had happened, her head pounding with a pain that felt like her skull was splitting open from the inside. The doctors explained it in careful, clinical terms: cerebral aneurysm, sudden rupture, catastrophic but survivable because someone had performed CPR immediately, had given her those critical minutes that mean the difference between life and death and permanent brain damage. She was lucky to be alive, they kept saying, their voices solemn with the weight of how close she'd come to not being alive at all. But everyone around her was acting strange, evasive, their eyes sliding away from hers when she asked questions about what had happened. Preston Blackwell was especially attentive, hovering at her bedside, controlling the flow of information with the kind of careful management that made her instincts prickle. Her assistant brought carefully curated news clips, selected articles that told a specific story. Preston delivered his version of events with absolute certainty, his voice heavy with concern that felt just slightly off, like a note played a half-step flat. Your maintenance worker took advantage of a situation when you collapsed. He touched you inappropriately while you were unconscious. It's being handled. He's been arrested and charged. Cassandra's instinct, the same instinct that had built a $7 billion empire from nothing, was screaming that something was wrong. Preston's tone, his urgency to control the narrative, the way he kept positioning himself between her and information, it all felt calculated in a way that didn't match genuine concern. When she asked to see the security footage, to watch what had actually happened, Preston's answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Unfortunately, the cameras in that corridor were down for maintenance. But I saw it with my own eyes. I was there. I witnessed the entire thing. But Cassandra hadn't built her empire by accepting other people's versions of reality without verification. She'd learned early that trust was good, but verification was better, and something about this entire situation didn't add up. The pieces didn't fit together the way they should, the edges rough and misaligned. So she made a phone call, bypassing Preston entirely, going directly to the IT department that answered to her and her alone. I need the server logs for the security cameras on the executive floor the day I collapsed. The IT manager on the other end of the line sounded nervous, his voice tight with the kind of anxiety people get when they're caught between competing authorities. Ms. Ashford, Mr. Blackwell instructed us not to. Cassandra cut him off, her voice carrying the steel that had made her the youngest female CEO in tech industry history. I own this company. Get me the logs. Now. The logs arrived in her email 20 minutes later, and what she found in those lines of code and timestamps was damning. The cameras hadn't been down for maintenance at all. They'd been manually disabled from Preston's workstation, shut off deliberately, and the timestamp showed it had happened 20 minutes before her collapse. 20 minutes. Preston had turned off the security cameras, then waited, then claimed to witness an assault that no one else could verify because he'd eliminated the only objective evidence. Why would Preston disable the cameras and then claim to be the sole witness to a crime? The question hung in her mind, heavy and dark, leading to conclusions she didn't want to reach but couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, across the city in a cramped apartment that smelled like instant coffee and determination, journalist Sophia Chun was digging into the story with the kind of hunger that only young reporters possess, The ones who haven't been beaten down yet by editors and budgets, and the reality that most investigations lead nowhere. She could smell something wrong with the narrative, something rotten underneath the neat packaging of working-class predator attacks unconscious CEO. She started with Ethan's former EMT colleagues, tracking them down through expired certifications and old training rosters. The picture they painted didn't match the monster in the news. Guy was brilliant at emergency response. One told her over the phone, his voice certain. He saved my life once during a training accident. Stayed calm when everyone else was panicking. If Ethan Vaughn performed CPR on someone, he did it right, and he did it to save them. She interviewed his neighbors, the ones who hadn't turned on him yet, who remembered the man before the arrest. "Best father I've ever seen," an elderly woman said, her voice firm despite her age. "Those kids are his world. He'd never do what they're saying. Never." The narrative wasn't matching the monster. Sophia requested court documents, spent hours reading through Preston's official statement, and found holes. Timeline inconsistencies. Details that didn't quite align. She called hospitals, dug through licensing databases, and found Ethan's lapsed but legitimate EMT certification, proof that he'd been trained, that he knew what he was doing, that his story about performing CPR wasn't some convenient fabrication. Then she tracked down the paramedics who had responded to the call at Ashford Industries, bought one of them coffee, and convinced him to talk off the record. His answer changed everything. Honestly, that woman had textbook CPR performed on her. Ribs slightly bruised from compressions. That's normal, actually shows proper technique. You're supposed to compress hard enough to crack ribs if necessary. Whoever did CPR on Cassandra Ashford saved her life. No question. Ethan was living through his darkest moment, existing in a space where hope felt like a cruel joke and the future was nothing but a wall of black. The custody hearing was approaching, looming on the calendar like an execution date. Luna kept asking questions he couldn't answer, her 7-year-old brain trying to make sense of why their life had exploded, why they couldn't go home, why Daddy looked so sad all the time. "Daddy, why can't we go home?" she asked every few days, her voice small and confused, and Ethan had no answer that wouldn't terrify her. Noah was regressing, wetting the bed at night, clinging to Ethan during the day with a desperation that broke his heart into smaller and smaller pieces. Ethan's mom was worried about her own health, though she tried to hide it, the stress of everything taking a visible toll on her aging body. Marcus called with the trial date, 6 weeks away, which felt both impossibly far and terrifyingly close. The evidence review was devastating. Preston's testimony was detailed, specific, convincing in the way that lies can be convincing when they're told by someone with authority and confidence. There was no physical evidence of sexual assault, because of course there wasn't, because there hadn't been one. But Diane Kruger was building her case around the argument that lack of physical evidence was common with opportunity assaults, that predators were careful, that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. She was building everything on Preston's eyewitness account, and that was apparently enough. Her office kept leaking to the press, feeding the media machine with carefully worded statements. Overwhelming evidence of guilt. Credible witness testimony. Clear pattern of predatory behavior. At 2 a.m, Ethan found himself on his mom's back porch, unable to sleep, holding Luna's custody evaluation report in his hands. The social worker's assessment was clinical and devastating, concerning judgment demonstrated by defendant. Questions about fitness for unsupervised custody. The recommendation cut deeper than anything else. Supervised visitation only, pending trial outcome. He might get to see his kids a few hours a week, with a stranger watching his every interaction, judging every word, taking notes. If he was lucky, if he didn't go to prison, everything was converging toward a point that felt like either salvation or destruction, and Ethan couldn't tell which. Sophia Chin published her first article in a small online publication that most people had never heard of, Hero or Criminal. The case against Ethan Vaughn has troubling gaps. It wasn't much, just 3,000 words of careful journalism raising questions that mainstream media hadn't bothered to ask. But it caught traction in the strange way things sometimes do online, shared on Reddit threads, picked up by true crime forums, spreading through the networks of people who instinctively distrust official narratives. A few people started questioning the story, pointing out inconsistencies, demanding to see the evidence. Sophia reached out to Cassandra's office for comment, her email professional and persistent. Preston intercepted it, called Sophia personally with barely concealed threats about libel and legal action, his voice cold with warning. But he couldn't intercept everything. Sophia's article reached Cassandra anyway, forwarded by her personal assistant who thought she should see it, and Cassandra read it on her iPad while recovering in her penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. The questions Sophia raised matched the questions already forming in Cassandra's own mind, the doubts that had been growing since she'd seen those server logs. She picked up her phone and called her personal lawyer, separate from the corporate attorneys, someone who answered only to her. "I need an independent investigation into what happened the day I collapsed. Something is very wrong about this case, and I need to know the truth." Meanwhile, Ethan received an eviction notice from his storage unit, the last place he'd kept the remnants of his old life. He couldn't pay the fees anymore, so they were going to auction off everything he owned, furniture, photo albums, the kids' baby clothes he'd kept for sentimental reasons. His worldly goods were being reduced to whatever fit in his mom's garage. Luna's 7th birthday was approaching, just a few days away, and he had no money for gifts, no money for a cake, no money for the party she deserved. Sometimes the truth takes its time, moving at its own pace regardless of how much damage accumulates while it travels. Sometimes it arrives too late, after lives have been destroyed beyond repair, after the innocent have been crushed under the weight of lies. And sometimes, just sometimes, it arrives exactly when it's needed most. We're 6 chapters in, and if you're still not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, you're gambling on remembering to come back tomorrow. Don't do that. Subscribe now, so you never miss a story like this. We tell stories about justice, injustice, and redemption daily. If you're refusing to subscribe, drop a comment and tell me why. Is it laziness? Forgetfulness? Principle? I'm genuinely curious what makes someone watch 6 chapters but not hit one button. Help me understand. Cassandra's private investigator was ex-FBI, the kind of man who'd spent decades learning how to find things people didn't want found, and his report landed on her desk like a bomb with the pin already pulled. Preston Blackwell had gambling debts, serious ones, the kind that involved dangerous people and consequences that went beyond lawsuits and bankruptcy. $340,000 owed to the kind of men who didn't accept payment plans or excuses. The investigator's work was meticulous, tracking financial transactions that Preston had hidden well but not well enough, following digital trails through offshore accounts and shell companies. He'd been skimming from the corporate security budget for months, small amounts at first, carefully covered, gradually growing bolder as desperation increased. The timeline was damning. The debts had come due the week of Cassandra's collapse, payments demanded, threats made explicit. The investigator's theory was laid out in clinical language, but the implications were chilling. Preston had needed a distraction, a crisis big enough to divert attention from financial discrepancies that were about to be discovered during the upcoming quarterly audit. Or worse, and the investigator didn't rule this out, there might have been a life insurance angle, a calculation about what Cassandra's death would mean for corporate restructuring and his ability to cover his tracks permanently. The investigator had found something else too, buried in server logs that Preston hadn't thought to scrub. Preston had accessed Ethan's employment file the morning of Cassandra's collapse, searching through his background, looking for leverage, vulnerability, anything that could make him a believable villain. The maintenance worker had been a target of opportunity, someone invisible enough to sacrifice, someone poor enough that his word would never carry weight against Preston's authority. Cassandra's anger crystallized as she read, cold and focused and absolute. This wasn't about protecting her. It had never been about protecting her. It was about protecting himself, and he'd been willing to destroy an innocent man to do it. Her first day back at work came against doctor's orders, her head still aching with echoes of the aneurysm, but Cassandra hadn't built an empire by staying home when things needed to be handled. She called Preston to her office, and he came with the confidence of someone who thought he still controlled the narrative. Her voice was cold enough to frost glass when she spoke. "Tell me again what happened when I collapsed." Preston's version came out smooth and rehearsed, the story he told so many times it probably felt true even to him. Cassandra let him finish, watching his face, cataloging the micro-expressions that betrayed his lies. "Interesting," she said, her tone making the words sound like an accusation. Because the server logs show you disabled the security cameras 20 minutes before I fell. Why would you do that? Preston's face flickered through a sequence of emotions too fast to fully process. Fear, calculation, rapid mental adjustment, before settling on manufactured concern. Ms. Ashford, you're not thinking clearly. The aneurysm might have affected your memory, your judgment. You should be resting, not. Cassandra cut him off with surgical precision. Don't gaslight me, Preston. IT confirmed it. You shut down those cameras from your workstation. Then, conveniently, you were the only witness to an assault that never happened. The only person who could tell a story that couldn't be contradicted by video evidence. Preston tried to maintain his composure, falling back on the role of protector. You were unconscious. You don't know what that man did to you while you were vulnerable. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. He saved my life. He performed CPR that gave me those critical minutes before the paramedics arrived. And you're destroying his life to cover your own crimes. Preston's mask finally dropped, and what emerged was desperation, raw and ugly and terrifying in its selfishness. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Those people, they'll kill me if I don't pay. I needed time, needed a distraction big enough that the audit wouldn't matter, that nobody would be looking at the numbers. The maintenance guy, he paused, searching for words that would make her understand. He was nobody. No one would miss him. He was collateral damage. The confession was chilling in its casualness, the way he reduced a human life to acceptable losses in his personal war for survival. Cassandra felt disgust rising in her throat like bile. He has children, a family, a life. You tried to send an innocent man to prison for 15 years to buy yourself time. Preston's voice took on a defensive edge, trying to reframe his actions as something other than monstrosity. I was protecting the company. If my gambling debts came out, if the embezzlement was discovered, the scandal would have destroyed stock prices, damaged the brand. I was trying to contain it. Cassandra's voice went flat with contempt. You were protecting yourself by sacrificing him. Don't pretend this was noble. Preston played his final card, the threat he'd been holding in reserve, his voice turning ugly. If you expose me, I'll take the company down with me. I know things. Transactions you want buried. Deals that wouldn't look good in depositions. You need me to stay quiet. Cassandra smiled then, cold and sharp as a knife's edge. I'm Cassandra Ashford. I've survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and rooms full of men who underestimated me. You think I'm afraid of you? She picked up her phone before Preston could respond, her lawyer already on speed dial. I need you to contact the prosecutor immediately. I'm making a formal statement recanting the allegations against Ethan Vaughn and providing evidence of Preston Blackwell's criminal activities. Preston's face went pale, but before he could speak, before he could threaten or beg, or try one more manipulation, security was entering the office, summoned by Cassandra's assistant who'd been listening to the entire conversation with recording equipment running. Simultaneously, across the city, Sophia Chin received an anonymous tip, an encrypted email with financial records attached, documentation of Preston's embezzlement and gambling debts, everything laid out in irrefutable detail. Sophia spent 6 hours verifying the documents, cross-referencing bank records and corporate filings, making absolutely certain before she published. When her article dropped, it exploded across the internet like a bomb. Ashford Industries security chief accused of framing innocent man to cover embezzlement. The story went viral within hours, trending on every platform, the narrative flipping so fast it gave people whiplash. Prosecutor Diane Kruger's office descended into chaos, her star witness suddenly a criminal suspect, her slam-dunk case evaporating like morning fog. Marcus Reed called Ethan with a voice shaking, so badly he could barely get the words out. They're dropping the charges. Cassandra Ashford is giving a statement clearing you. It's over. You're free. Ethan stood in his mom's kitchen holding the phone, his hand trembling so violently he almost dropped it. Unable to process what he was hearing, his brain unable to shift from nightmare to reality that quickly. The press conference happened that afternoon, Cassandra standing at a microphone with makeup carefully applied to cover the hospital pallor that still lingered from her brush with death. Her statement was measured but powerful, each word chosen with the precision that had made her a legendary negotiator. On the day I collapsed from a cerebral aneurysm, Ethan Vaughn saved my life by performing CPR. He acted heroically and selflessly, responding with training and courage while others stood frozen. The accusations against him are completely false, fabricated by someone I trusted who was covering his own criminal activities. I am devastated that a good man and his family have suffered because of crimes committed by my head of security. I am formally asking the district attorney to drop all charges against Mr. Vaughn immediately, and I will cooperate fully with any investigation into Preston Blackwell's actions. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together into incomprehensible noise, but Cassandra's message was clear and unambiguous. Ethan watched from his mom's living room, Luna pressed against his side, her small body warm and solid and real. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked, "Daddy, are you okay now?" He pulled her close, unable to speak past the knot in his throat, unable to articulate the weight of 2 months crashing down on him all at once. Relief and trauma were colliding in his chest, gratitude and anger and exhaustion creating an emotional storm he didn't have words for. Noah climbed into his lap, and Ethan held both his children while his mom cried quietly in the kitchen, and the truth that had finally arrived felt both too late and exactly on time. The truth had finally arrived, but vindication doesn't erase the damage. And sometimes, justice requires more than just drop charges. If you've made it 7 chapters without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller, you're robbing yourself of stories like this every single day. We post emotional, powerful content about real human struggles constantly. Subscribe right now, so you see tomorrow's story about a nurse who exposed hospital corruption and paid the price. If you're not subscribing, drop a comment explaining why, because at this point, I'm genuinely baffled. What would it take for you to support this channel? The charges were officially dropped within 48 hours of Cassandra's press conference, the legal machinery moving with surprising speed when a billionaire CEO demands action and the prosecutor's case has collapsed into rubble. Ethan's arrest record would be expunged, though that was a long legal process involving paperwork and bureaucracy and waiting periods that stretched into months. But the damage had already been done, carved into his life like scars that would never fully fade. His reputation was in tatters, his name permanently associated with accusations that Google would never fully forget. Job prospects were non-existent because even exoneration doesn't erase the stain of arrest, doesn't remove the whisper of "but what if" that follows the wrongfully accused forever. His apartment was gone, rented to new tenants who had no idea about the previous occupant's nightmare. His savings were depleted, drained by legal fees and survival expenses during 2 months of unemployment. His credit was destroyed, late payments and defaults creating a financial scar tissue that would take years to heal. His mom's health had declined from the stress, a mild heart attack that landed her in the hospital for 3 days, and though she was recovering, she'd been weakened in ways that aging bodies don't fully bounce back from. These were the invisible costs of being wrongfully accused, the collateral damage that never makes it into the narrative of vindication. Karen withdrew her custody suit once public opinion turned, once it became clear that positioning herself as the protective parent would backfire spectacularly, but the relationship with his kids had been strained in ways Ethan didn't know how to fix. Luna was having nightmares, waking up screaming that Daddy was being taken away. Noah had become clingy, afraid that if Ethan left his sight he would disappear again, vanish into whatever confusing adult world had swallowed him before. The therapy bills were piling up from the court-ordered psychological evaluation, fees Ethan had to pay even though he'd been proven innocent. The victory felt hollow when he tallied the wreckage, counted the cost of being right. Preston Blackwell was arrested in a dawn raid that the news helicopters captured from above, his expensive suit and confident demeanor looking out of place in handcuffs. The charges read like a criminal resume: embezzlement, fraud, filing a false police report, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice. Each count carried years of potential prison time, and they stacked on top of each other like bricks building a wall Preston would never climb over. Prosecutor Diane Kruger was facing her own reckoning, criticism pouring in from legal analysts and civil rights groups about rushing to prosecute without thorough investigation, about letting her political ambitions override her duty to justice. Her political career had been damaged, maybe irreparably, her name now associated with a spectacular failure rather than the high-profile victory she'd imagined. Her statement was defensive, hiding behind bureaucratic language that fooled no one. We proceed based on the evidence available to us at the time. Mr. Blackwell's deception was sophisticated and designed specifically to mislead investigators. Translation: she was covering her ambition with excuses about being tricked, refusing to acknowledge that she'd been so eager to prosecute a working-class defendant that she'd skipped the basic due diligence that might have uncovered the truth earlier. Preston's trial date was set for 6 months out, and his lawyer was already trying to negotiate a plea deal that would spare him the worst of the consequences. But the people he owed money to were circling now, emboldened by his arrest, no longer fearing his connections or his authority. They wanted their $340,000, and they weren't the kind of people who accepted, "I'll pay you after my trial," as an answer. Sometimes karma works fast, and sometimes it's brutal in its efficiency. Cassandra requested a meeting with Ethan a week after the charges were dropped, suggesting a neutral location rather than her office or anywhere that might feel like a power imbalance. They met at a small coffee shop in a neighborhood halfway between her world and his, her security maintaining a discreet distance at nearby tables. This was the first time they'd been face to face since the day he'd saved her life, the first time they'd spoken since everything had exploded. Cassandra looked different than her portraits, smaller somehow, more human, the weight of guilt visible in the tension around her eyes. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, carrying none of the boardroom authority, just honest remorse. "I owe you my life, and I'm horrified by what happened because of that. Horrified that saving me destroyed you." Ethan was guarded, protective walls still up, not sure how to navigate this conversation with someone who existed in an entirely different universe of wealth and power. "You didn't do it. Preston did. You're not responsible for his crimes." But Cassandra shook her head, refusing to let herself off that easily. "It happened in my company, because of my employee under my watch. I hired him. I trusted him. I created the environment where he thought he could get away with this. That makes me responsible." She offered restitution then, laying it out with the directness of someone used to negotiating deals. Legal fees paid in full, every penny Marcus had charged, and every penny he would have charged if the case had gone to trial. A job opportunity, direct hire at Ashford Industries, corporate facilities management, a salary triple what he'd made before. College funds established for Luna and Noah, enough to cover 4 years at any university they chose. Therapy costs covered for as long as any of them needed it. Ethan's pride was warring with practicality, the part of him that wanted to refuse on principle fighting with the reality that Luna needed glasses and Noah needed stability, and his mom needed help she couldn't afford. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. "Please, let me do what's right. You saved my life. I want to help save yours." Ethan sat with the offer, turning it over in his mind, trying to find the catch, the hidden strings, the ways this could go wrong. Cassandra added more, her voice gaining strength as she outlined something bigger than just his personal restitution. "I've also established a foundation, the Second Chance Legal Defense Fund, for people who are wrongfully accused and can't afford proper representation, who are being crushed by the system the way you almost were. I'm endowing it with $50 million to start, with more to come. Your case showed me how easily someone's life can be destroyed by a lie combined with class disparity and a prosecutor more interested in career advancement than truth. I want to fix that system, or at least make a dent in it." Ethan could see the sincerity in her face, the guilt driving her determination, the genuine desire to turn his nightmare into something that might prevent other nightmares. He made his decision, but with a condition that surprised her. "I'll take the job. On one condition, you give Sophie Etchen the first interview about all of this. She's a journalist who believed me when no one else did, who dug into the story when everyone else was satisfied with the easy narrative. She deserves the story." Cassandra nodded immediately, respect showing in her expression. "Done. Absolutely done." They shook hands then, the gesture formal but meaningful, sealing an unlikely alliance formed in crisis and survival. Two people from different worlds finding common ground in truth, and the determination to do something good with something terrible. Sophia's article ran as the front-page feature in a major publication that had picked up her work after her smaller pieces went viral, the headline stark and powerful. "From accused to vindicated, The true story of Ethan Vaughn and the CPR that changed everything. She'd interviewed both Ethan and Cassandra, built a complete timeline from the morning Ethan woke up to make his kids breakfast through Preston's arrest, explored the systemic issues of class and justice, and the presumption of innocence that gets extended to some people but not others. The narrative was correcting in real time, the story being rewritten from cautionary tale about workplace predators to cautionary tale about rush to judgment and the vulnerability of the poor when the system decides they're guilty. Online support flooded in, complete strangers moved by Ethan's story, by the injustice and the eventual vindication. Someone established a GoFundMe without his permission, and it raised $80,000 in 3 days, people contributing $5 and $10 and $20 with messages about believing in justice, about being inspired by his refusal to plead guilty to something he didn't do. Messages came from other wrongfully accused people, sharing their own stories, some of whom had been less lucky than Ethan, who'd taken plea deals or served time, or never been vindicated at all. Ethan's story was becoming a catalyst for larger conversations about class and justice and the assumption of guilt that poor defendants face every day. Luna read the supportive comments with Ethan one evening, her face brightening as she finally understood that her dad was a hero, that saving someone's life was exactly as good as she'd always believed it was. Noah was too young to fully understand the nuances, but he could sense the energy shift, could feel that the darkness that had hung over their family was finally lifting. Ethan's first day at his new job came 2 weeks later, and he showed up wearing business casual clothes that Cassandra had insisted on providing through a wardrobe allowance, standing in front of a building he'd once entered through the service entrance. He had his own office now, a real office with windows and a door, his name on a placard beside it. Ethan Vaughn, Director of Facility Safety. The surreal nature of resurrection hit him as he sat at his desk, running his fingers over the nameplate, trying to reconcile the man who'd been in handcuffs on this building's marble floor with the man who now had an office here. Sometimes destruction precedes transformation. Sometimes losing everything makes room for something better. Sometimes. 8 chapters in. If you're still not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, I honestly don't know what you're doing. This is the kind of story we tell constantly, real people, real struggles, real triumphs. Subscribe now, so you never miss content like this. Tomorrow's story is about a whistleblower who exposed corporate fraud and lived to tell about it. If you're genuinely not subscribing, comment below and tell me what would make you change your mind. Is it the length? The topics? The presentation? I'm asking sincerely because I want to serve you better. Preston Blackwell's trial began 6 months after Ethan's exoneration, and the courtroom was packed with the kind of crowd that only high-profile cases attract. Media filled the back rows, cameras prohibited inside, but reporters scribbling notes with the intensity of people who knew this story would dominate headlines. Ashford Industries employees came in clusters, some out of loyalty to Cassandra, others drawn by the spectacle of watching someone from the executive floor fall from grace. Curious members of the public who'd follow the case online lined up hours early for the limited seating. Ethan attended every single day, sitting in the same seat in the 3rd row. Luna and Noah staying with his mom during the proceedings but waiting for him each evening to hear how it went. Cassandra took the stand on day 3, and her testimony was delivered with the steady authority of someone who'd built an empire on being believed. She described her collapse, the confusion of waking up in a hospital, the careful way Preston had controlled information and shaped the narrative. She talked about discovering the truth through server logs and private investigation, her voice never wavering as she laid out how her trusted security chief had betrayed everything. Preston's defense attorney tried to paint him as desperate rather than malicious, his voice taking on a pleading quality. Mr. Blackwell made a terrible mistake under extraordinary financial pressure. He never intended for things to escalate the way Cassandra interrupted, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. He intended to send an innocent man to prison for 15 years. He succeeded in destroying a good person's life for 2 months. Intent isn't debatable here. Ethan took the stand in the parallel civil case, his testimony quiet but carrying a power that had nothing to do with volume. He described the day in detail, the moment he saw Cassandra collapse, the instinct that made him run toward her instead of away, the CPR that saved her life. Then he described the arrest, the handcuffs, the accusation that turned heroism into assault in the span of seconds. He talked about the aftermath with a simplicity that made it even more devastating: the custody battle, the job loss, watching his children suffer while being helpless to protect them from the consequences of doing the right thing. His voice broke when he said, "I did everything right. I performed CPR exactly the way I was trained. I saved someone's life. And I lost everything anyway." The jury watched him, and several had tears in their eyes, the weight of his words settling over the courtroom like heavy snow. Preston's lawyer cross-examined him, trying to suggest that Ethan had capitalized on the situation, that the job and the restitution and the media attention were somehow what he'd been after all along. Ethan's response was so simple it hurt. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want any of this. I just want my life back. The life I had before I tried to help someone." There was no revenge in his voice, no anger, no satisfaction at watching Preston face consequences. Just exhaustion and the desire for something that could never fully be restored. The character witnesses painted a picture of two men that couldn't have been more different. Ethan's former EMT colleagues described someone who was brilliant under pressure, who stayed calm when others panicked, who had saved multiple lives during his years in emergency response. His neighbors talked about the man they'd known, the dedicated single father who coached his daughter through homework and never missed a school event, who helped elderly Mrs. Patel carry groceries up the stairs even when he was exhausted from work. Luna's teacher testified about how involved Ethan was, how much he cared, how Luna talked about her dad like he was her hero. Sophia Chen took the stand to describe her investigation, walking the jury through the inconsistencies she'd found, the evidence that didn't match Preston's narrative, the way the truth had been buried under authority and class assumptions. The IT manager testified about the camera logs, his voice shaking as he described how Preston had disabled the security system from his own workstation, how he'd lied about maintenance that never existed. The paramedics who responded that day confirmed the quality of the CPR performed on Cassandra, explained that proper compressions often bruise ribs, testified that whoever had performed that CPR had saved her life without question. Then came Preston's gambling associates, brought in under plea deals for their own crimes, testifying about the debts, the threats, Preston's growing desperation in the weeks before Cassandra's collapse. The case built into an irrefutable mountain of evidence, each piece adding to a picture of calculated cruelty and self-preservation at any cost. Preston's defense was crumbling in real time, his lawyers running out of angles, running out of ways to make their client look like anything other than what he was. The closing arguments came on day 12 of the trial, and the prosecutor, a different one, because Diane Kruger had declined to try the case, her involvement in the initial prosecution making her toxic to this proceeding, delivered his with the controlled passion of someone who believed in what he was saying. Preston Blackwell betrayed his position of trust. He betrayed his employer who relied on him for protection. And he betrayed an innocent man, weaponizing our justice system for personal gain, turning the machinery meant to protect us into a tool of destruction aimed at someone whose only crime was saving a life. This is not merely embezzlement or fraud, though those charges are serious enough. This is an assault on the very foundation of fairness that our society depends on. When we can't trust that the truth will protect the innocent, when we can't believe that doing the right thing won't destroy us, everything falls apart. Preston's lawyer made a weak appeal to sympathy, suggesting that his client had already lost everything, that prison time would serve no purpose beyond revenge. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, barely long enough to eat lunch and review the evidence one final time. When they returned, the verdict was read on all counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The word repeated like a drumbeat, and Preston's face collapsed with each repetition, the reality finally breaking through whatever denial he'd been living in. The sentencing hearing came a week later, and the judge was unequivocal in her condemnation. You held a position of trust within a major corporation. You abused that trust catastrophically. You nearly destroyed an innocent family to cover your own crimes. 8 to 12 years in state prison, full restitution to Mr. Vaughn for all damages, and a lifetime ban from any work in law enforcement or security. Preston was led away in handcuffs, and Ethan watched from the gallery, feeling not triumph but a deep sadness. None of this needed to happen. All of it could have been avoided if one man had made different choices. After the trial, outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters swarmed Ethan as he emerged, microphones thrust toward his face, cameras capturing every angle. They asked him how he felt, what he wanted to say, whether he felt vindicated. His statement was simple, stripped of anger or bitterness, carrying only gratitude and relief. "I'm grateful the truth came out. I'm grateful for the people who believed me when it would have been easier not to. Ms. Ashford, Sophia Chun, my family, my mom who never doubted me for a second. I'm grateful I still have my kids. That's all that really matters." Luna tugged on his hand, looking up at him with those wide, 7-year-old eyes that had seen too much but were starting to fill with trust again. "Dad, can we go home now?" Noah chimed in with his 5-year-old directness. "Are the badmen gone?" Ethan knelt to their level, right there on the courthouse steps with cameras recording and reporters watching, and pulled both his children close. "Yeah, buddy. The badmen are gone. We're safe now." They walked to the company car Cassandra had insisted on providing, her driver waiting patiently while the media circus swirled around them. As they drove away, they passed the Ashford Industries building, that glass tower that had been the site of both his destruction and his resurrection. It wasn't intimidating anymore. It was his workplace now, part of his daily life, transformed from the place of his nightmare into a symbol of his new beginning. Sophia's article was already posted online, her headline direct and satisfying. "Justice delayed but delivered. Preston Blackwell gets 8 to 12 years." The comments were flooding in, thousands of people weighing in on the case, the cultural conversation shifting toward class and justice, and the presumption of guilt that falls so differently on the poor versus the powerful. One chapter was closing, another was opening, the space between nightmare and redemption measured in seconds, minutes, months. 9 chapters. If you're still not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller at this point, I genuinely don't understand your decision-making process. We give you complete, emotional, satisfying stories like this every single day. Subscribe right now, so you don't miss tomorrow's story about a single mother who fought a corporation and won. If you're not subscribing, comment and explain your reasoning, because I'm truly puzzled. What is it about this channel that doesn't make you want to come back? Help me understand, so I can give you what you actually want. 1 year later, Ethan sat in his office at Ashford Industries reviewing safety protocols, and the surreal nature of his resurrection still hit him sometimes when he wasn't expecting it. His job had become meaningful in ways he hadn't anticipated, implementing programs that protected both workers and executives, bridging the class divide through policy rather than pretending it didn't exist. He was training other maintenance workers in emergency response, creating pathways for working-class employees to advance within the company, giving people like him opportunities that had never existed before. The dream he deferred when Luna was born, that pre-med track that had led to EMT certification and then to nothing, was finding new expression in work that actually mattered. He was saving lives in a different way now, through prevention and preparation, and making sure that when emergencies happened, people knew what to do and weren't afraid to act. Luna was in 3rd grade now, thriving in ways that made Ethan's chest ache with gratitude every time he watched her. Her confidence had rebuilt itself slowly, brick by brick, until she was raising her hand in class again and laughing with her friends and sleeping through the night without screaming. Noah was in 1st grade, and the nightmares had finally stopped, his 5-year-old resilience allowing him to bounce back in ways that adults never quite manage. Ethan's mom had recovered from her heart attack, living independently again in her small house, and the pride in her voice when she talked about her son could have powered a small city. They had a small apartment now, a nice one in a decent school district, the kind of place Ethan used to dream about when he was counting pennies on his kitchen counter. His savings account was rebuilding, his credit slowly being repaired through patient payments and time. Life wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was stable. It was real. Ethan had become a mentor through Cassandra's Second Chance Legal Defense Fund, speaking at community centers about his experience, helping others who'd been wrongfully accused navigate a system designed to crush them. His story had become a tool for change in ways he'd never expected or sought. There was a legislative reform bill pending in the state legislature, and people were calling it Ethan's Law, even though he'd had nothing to do with drafting it. The bill would require body cameras for corporate security personnel, impose serious penalties for filing false police reports, and provide support services for people who'd been wrongfully accused and later exonerated. Sophia Chen's continued reporting had elevated the issue, turning one man's nightmare into a broader conversation about systemic failures and class-based assumptions of guilt. Ethan had never expected to be an activist, had never imagined himself speaking to rooms full of people or testifying before legislative committees, but injustice had transformed him in ways that couldn't be undone. He'd learned that you could either let pain destroy you or you could use it for purpose, and he'd chosen purpose because his kids were watching and learning what it meant to be a good person in a world that wasn't always fair. Cassandra and Ethan had become unlikely friends, meeting monthly for coffee to discuss the Foundation's work, their conversations ranging from specific cases to broader questions about justice and class and how to fix systems that seemed designed to stay broken. She valued his perspective, his working-class reality check for her billionaire bubble, the way he could spot problems and solutions that would never occur to someone who'd never worried about making rent. He appreciated her genuine commitment to systemic change, the way she used her wealth and power not just to write checks but to actually transform how things worked. Their collaboration was producing real results that could be measured and counted. 47 wrongfully accused people had been freed or had charges dropped in the first year of the Foundation's operation. Legal reforms were passing in 3 states, with more bills pending in others. Corporate accountability standards were tightening, making it harder for people like Preston to abuse their positions without oversight. One case had come through the Foundation just last month that resembled Ethan's story so closely it made his skin crawl. A maintenance worker accused of theft by a supervisor who was covering his own embezzlement. The Foundation's lawyers had gotten the charges dropped in 72 hours before the man lost his job or his kids or his sanity. Ethan and Cassandra had talked about that case over coffee, their voices quiet with the weight of what they were accomplishing. "We're making a difference," Ethan had said. Cassandra's response was immediate. "We're just getting started." Luna's 8th birthday party was everything the 7th one hadn't been, the celebration they'd missed during the nightmare when Ethan had no money and no hope and no idea if he'd even be free to attend her next birthday. He went all out this time, renting space at a trampoline park, inviting all her friends from school, ordering a cake with her favorite cartoon character decorated in purple frosting. His mom was there, healthy and smiling, and taking pictures with the enthusiasm of a woman who'd almost lost everything but hadn't. Sophia Chen came too, having become a family friend in the strange way that shared trauma creates bonds between unlikely people. Even Cassandra stopped by briefly, at Luna's specific request, because Luna thought Cassandra was like a superhero and wanted her to see the party. Luna blew out her candle surrounded by friends and family, making a wish she didn't speak aloud but that showed in her smile and the joy in her eyes. Ethan watched her from across the room and remembered the scared 7-year-old who'd asked, "Why can't we go home?" over and over until the question had carved itself into his heart. The contrast between that child and this one was almost painful, evidence of healing that felt miraculous even though it had come through hard work and time and therapy bills and patience. Noah was playing with his friends, running and jumping and shrieking with laughter, no longer afraid that happiness would disappear if he let himself feel it. The healing was visible but incomplete because trauma doesn't just vanish even when circumstances improve. Ethan still had nightmares sometimes, still tensed when he saw police cars, still carried the weight of 2 months when his entire world had been destroyed for doing the right thing. But he was functional, present, grateful in ways that went deeper than simple happiness. Sometimes survival is enough. Sometimes being able to stand up and keep going is its own kind of victory. The drive home from Luna's party was quiet, both kids asleep in the back seat, sugar-crashed and exhausted from hours of jumping and running and being 8 and 5 years old without any shadows hanging over them. Ethan took the long route, passing the intersection where his life had exploded, where the Ashford Industries building stood lit up against the night sky like a monument to something he couldn't quite name. His mind wandered to an alternate timeline, the way it sometimes did late at night when he couldn't sleep. What if he hadn't stopped to help that day? What if he'd loaded his tools and driven away, leaving Cassandra Ashford to die on the marble floor of her own building? She might have died, probably would have died, the doctors had said, without those critical minutes of CPR before the paramedics arrived. But he wouldn't have been destroyed, wouldn't have been arrested, accused, crushed under the weight of a system designed to protect people like her from people like him. His kids wouldn't have suffered. His mom wouldn't have had a heart attack from stress. He wouldn't carry the scars he carried now, visible and invisible, the trauma that had reshaped him in ways he was still discovering. The moral calculus was impossible, unsolvable, the kind of equation that had no right answer. Would he do it again, knowing the cost? The answer came immediately, without hesitation, rising from somewhere deeper than thought. Yes, absolutely yes. Because Luna and Noah were watching him every day, learning from his choices what kind of person they should become. They needed to see their father be someone who helped when help was needed, who did the right thing regardless of cost, who didn't calculate whether kindness would be rewarded before extending it. That was the only way to live, the only way to teach them to live, even if it was harder and more dangerous and came with consequences that seemed unbearable. He pulled into his parking spot at their apartment building, the nice building in the good school district, and carried Noah inside while Luna shuffled after him, half asleep and clutching the stuffed animal she'd won at the arcade. He tucked them both into their beds, pulled the covers up to their chins, kissed their foreheads. Their trust had been restored, rebuilt through consistency and presence and time. His purpose was clear now in ways it had never been before. Ethan Vaughn had learned that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee reward. Sometimes it guarantees suffering. Sometimes it destroys everything you've built, and everyone you love gets caught in the blast radius. But that doesn't make it less right. It just makes it harder. And harder, Ethan had learned, was something he could handle. He'd been broken and rebuilt. And the rebuilt version was stronger. That's the end of Ethan's story. If you watched all 10 chapters and still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, I honestly don't know what to say. We give you these complete, emotional journeys every single day, stories about justice, resilience, and the human spirit. If you don't subscribe right now, you'll lose this channel in the algorithm and forget we exist. Don't let that happen. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and be here tomorrow when we tell the story of a teacher who stood up to corruption and changed everything. And if you're still not subscribing after all of this, drop a comment and tell me why. What would it actually take for you to support this channel? Because I'm genuinely asking, what am I missing? What would make you commit? Tell me, because I want to serve you better. I want to tell stories you actually value enough to come back for.